gentlemen and friends. It is absolutely an honor to be here and to share some thoughts and really give you some inspiration. I'm not going to go through the entire book, all the 10 steps. I will share some concerns that I have and perhaps end on a happier note as to what we might do about it. I should say that I don't think they're going to make this book into a movie. It might be a play in a cave somewhere after World War III, but it certainly won't be made into a movie. I did go with this idea. This is prior, I should stress, prior to Donald Trump's second term of office, to say to Penguin and to Macmillan, I've got this idea for a book, 10 steps to prevent World War III. And they said, you're scaring the willies off us. It's never going to happen. And now I really want to go back to them. I'm now with Bonnier, who are fantastic publishers, delightful. But I feel like I want to go back to these other publishers and say, do you believe me now that the world is getting a little bit more dangerous? And that's, I think, the concern, as Shafik has touched on it already, that you can be a doctor and look at a patient and say, you're not doing well. Things are not going well. You can be an engineer and look at a motor vehicle and say, yes, that needs attention. It's not going in the right direction. You don't need to be a military strategist or indeed a diplomat to know that our world is not in a great place. And it seems to be getting more and more in a worse position. I asked 3 questions. I won't insult this intelligent audience tonight, but when I do speak, I ask 3 basic questions to an audience just to set the tone of the evening. The first question is, do you believe in the next 5 years the world will be more dangerous or less? And everybody agrees that it's going to be more dangerous. Second question is, do you have faith? Do you have faith in those currently in charge to sort the problems out and to take us into a better place? And I'm sadly to say very few hands go up. The third question, the answer of which is quite revealing, because I then ask, well, would you stand? Would you put your names forward? Would you get elected to help be part of that solution? And very few hands then go up there as well. And that's a dilemma that we face. We know the things that it's going bad, but nobody's willing to then to step forward. And that's not because they're not good enough to do it, or they're in post. It's partly because of the machine that is there to get people into government, get people into parliament, puts people off. So Britain is the worse off for it. I remember walking in to the House of Commons in 2007. I was elected in 2005. 2007, in February, there's some place called the Members' Lobby, just outside the main House of Commons chamber. And 6 o'clock in the evening, and they were doing the unveiling of the statue for Margaret Thatcher. And I happened to be walking through, and I, very junior person, just stood on the edge. But all the grandees were there. Of course, Margaret was there, but Michael Heseltine was there, Michael Howard, you had all the opposition, Tony Blair, Robin Cook, Malcolm Rifkin, all these characters, Nigel Lawson, Geoffrey Howe. And I just looked at that and I thought, my goodness, I'm amongst greatness. I'm looking at the big beasts of British politics. You may not agree with what they say, but you absolutely would tip your hat to say they know what they're talking about and they are true leaders of their day. And I don't know if Kwasi would agree with me, because we've both been in politics for a number of years, that the quality of leadership, the statecraft that we see in the generations that are coming forward, we miss what I saw there. We don't have the great orators, the great thinkers, the great strategists. And that's because politics itself has changed. And that's actually step 8, is actually doing democracy better. How can we encourage authoritarian states, dictatorships, to do more democracy, to be like us, if we don't want to be like us? And that is the challenge that we face. That's the dilemma that we seek to perhaps answer. And I was thinking of those watching television with our son Oscar, massively into the space stuff. Artemis, that big spaceship coming back down. And the comments that those astronauts made, looking at the Earth, they were very diplomatic about it. But I don't know if you picked up, they were looking at it and saying how amazing it is to look at the world from afar. And they very carefully chose their words, but to say, we're looking at all of humanity here. We're looking at the world as one. There are big problems in the world, but boy, you are just one planet in a bigger solar system. That's all we are. That's what we've got. We've got to make it work. And I think that resonates. And you think back at the timeline of of humanity, the last 4 million years and so forth, and how we've sort of moved forward. The empires and civilizations that have come and gone. You first had the builders who learned to live together. The Mesopotamia, Egyptians, for example, as well. Early China and the Indus Valley, of where humans started to settle in one particular place. That was followed by the organizers, teaching us how to think and to learn. The civilizations of Rome, of Greece, and so forth. India, the Han Dynasty. And then came the believers, where faith then became a thing. The Islamic faith, Christianity, and so forth. That was the next generation of civilization advance. That was followed by the connectors, how we then started to link together, the Silk Roads, where these individual civilizations started to actually sort of work together, to trade together. And then came the globalizers. This is now 1500s and onwards, from England, Britain, Portugal, Spain, and so forth, starting to dominate the world through industry, colonization, and exploration. And now, of course, that's been taken over by the superpowers as well. There's something called the doomsday clock. You may have come across it. After Oppenheimer and so on created the nuclear weapon, and they realized they'd done something quite profound, that humanity can now destroy itself very easily indeed. And the time they set, when that clock was created in 1946, I think, was 7 minutes to midnight. When Donald Trump came in on his first term, I don't know why I use him as a reference, but I do. The time was 2.5 minutes, to midnight. Today, it's now 85 seconds to midnight. So, drink up, ladies and gentlemen. You've got 85 seconds to enjoy the evening. But when we speak to politicians, what are they focusing on? At the last election, I took more pictures of me standing over a pothole than I did in speaking about these international matters, because that's where domestic policy and politics actually is. My son, Oscar, had to hold the camera as I put an orange duck in one of these potholes that was full of water to make the case to say our potholes are not being fixed. I don't even have a responsibility. No MP has responsibility for potholes. But that is what gets you potentially re-elected. And it shows that we're not even telling the British people the bigger picture of where our world is going. It's the reason why the defence budget has not increased, despite the Defence Review making it very clear that our army, our air force, and our navy are too small. And we saw the debacle over Iran and the fact that we couldn't get HMS Dragon out there as an example to say that we're not prepared for what's coming over the hill. So we need to recognise where the world is going and move much faster. Storm clouds are gathering again. There is a comparison with 1938 of this world that we're actually in at the moment, that countries are starting to rearm, Western nations are becoming risk-averse, that the international organizations, that was the League of Nations in those days, are unable to hold errant nations to account, that no nations are now agreeing to a higher set of rules. And that's where we are today. But you add on to that 3 other dimensions, which makes our world all the more dangerous, and that's the rise of the non-state actor, that is the rise of extremism, and that is the rise of technology, and then to add on to that, you've got climate change as well. Just to really make you think, in about 15 years' time, the North Atlantic drift that keeps Britain nice and warm in the summer, that's going to pop away, and British temperatures will drop by 10 degrees. We're not talking about these things, and we do need to do so, because it will profoundly change how Britain operates. If there's one flake of snow in London, London comes to a halt. Imagine what happens when we start having Canadian winters. And we're not simply talking about these things. So step 1 is actually to sort of confirm who we are. Step 1 is actually about what are we willing to fight for? What actually links us all together? What binds us together on an international theme? Now, when you ask these questions in Parliament, everybody points to the world order, the international rules-based order. But then we forget how actually that came about. And it's quite an interesting story. Understanding the backdrop to this actually helps us say, how can we repair it? Because going back through all those civilizations, it was actually more common to be at war than actually at peace. The first time anybody ever decided to sit down and say, let's make some rules. This was in Europe at the time, because that's where most of the civilization was advancing fastest, where they agreed that you weren't no longer going to be able to charge into another country just because they had another religion, was in 1648, was the Treaty of Westphalia. That was after the 30 Years' War, which again, most MPs know nothing about. The worst war the world has ever seen, partly because of famine and all sorts of other problems as well. But also there was no clear outcome, there's no clear winner. And they all agreed, the nations that were fighting, to say, if we continue this way, Europe as an entity will be destroyed. So the Treaty of Westphalia came about, the first attempt to have a set of global rules. And that lasted for a while. The victors, there weren't any victors as such, but it operated. But some nations, because of their economy not doing well, decided they were going to ignore the rules, militarize, and go to war again. So that lasted until 1713, when we had the Treaty of Utrecht, which is a bun fight over who's going to lead Spain. And more war, another treaty, and that lasted all the way until 1814, until after Napoleon had done his thing. So we then had the Vienna Congress, and that did quite well, in fact, that set of rules. Until, of course, we ended up with World War I, where the Treaty of Versailles, which was a particularly bad treaty, and then only a few years later we then had Bretton Woods. And it's Bretton Woods, that grouping of organizations of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization as it is today, then the International Criminal Courts, and then the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These are the pillars that create our world order today. You've got security, you've got trade, you've got laws, and then you've got development to help countries if they're not doing particularly well. But if nobody bothers to turn up to support these organizations, then they start to fall apart. And that's where we are today. This cycle of where we are is that the architecture is still there, but we've absented ourselves from the buildings. And we've not upgraded them as well, given the fact that power has shifted around the world. So understanding our background and where we have been and what we want to fight for now is the most critical step. The second step is actually to know your enemies. And this is really interesting because I go back to the knowledge of MPs, and I shouldn't be so dismissive. There are some absolute specialists who've come in with amazing knowledge. But if you have too much knowledge, if you understand the subject in Parliament, they tend to put you in very much the opposite department than you ever might be able to use that knowledge. That's how crazy our system is. Rory Stewart is a great example. He did too well in the Department of International Development, so they put him in prisons. He knows nothing about prisons. 6 months later, he knew everything about prisons, and then they had to move him again because he had ideas. It's absolutely yes, Prime Minister. But on understanding our adversaries, the three that jump out, China is the best one. MPs know that Hong Kong was handed back to China. They have no idea how they got it in the first place. And there's a reason why China, Russia, and indeed Iran didn't like joining Bretton Woods in the first place. And that's because of something called the Century of Humiliation, which I'm sure many in this room will be familiar with. Started in the 1840s when Britain got obsessed with tea. We liked tea. So instead of buying it because it was costing the Treasury a lot of money, we worked out that if we took opium that we were growing in India and swapped it for tea in China, it was a lot cheaper. We made China high. That's exactly what we did. And the consequence of that is that they didn't like it. They actually threw the tea in the water. I don't know where they got that idea from. Just pushed back. And eventually it ended up with the Opium Wars. And we took over foreign policy. America joined in. Holland, France, other countries did as well. And the Han dynasty, the Qing dynasty, these dynasties that go back millennia, then imploded. And the country went into civil war. And then you have two sides of the civil war that you'll be familiar with. On the blue side, you have the nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, and then on the red side, you have Mao Zedong. And of course, it was the communists that won in 1949. We created the United Nations Security Council with 5 permanent members. Who did we give the seat to? Not to Beijing, not to Chairman Mao, but to where the Kuomintang had done a run or two, which was Taiwan. So they got that permanent seat on the United Nations. That is taught every day in schools in China. They grow up knowing that the West did this to them. That is what is in their mindset to be strong against the West because they feel vulnerable that it might happen again. And it's that example of putting our shoes in our feet in their shoes to understand their mindset as to why they perhaps don't sign on to the bigger picture. And Russia is no different as well. If you're familiar with Russian history, it used to be lots of principalities across Russia, 11 time zones, huge. If you've ever played the game Risk, green is really difficult to defend, isn't it? What's the best way to defend? Attack. And Ivan the Terrible worked this out. And he realized that you can't have loads of principalities. You've got to have one single authoritarian leader with the church behind it that stands up and is constantly on the march. Ivan the Terrible pushed the Mongols east. Peter the Great pushed the Swedes and Poles north. Catherine the Great went south, pushing the Turks out. And of course, Stalin was forced to, quite rightly, to push the Nazis back west. And that's exactly Putin's mindset now. That's what he thinks. And the Russian people, the motherland, understand that hardship. Democracy isn't something that comes naturally to them. I'm not saying it never would, but this idea that somehow we're going to see Putin fall today because he's doing stuff of hardship or the body bags are clocking up and then there's going to be free elections. It doesn't happen because they've never tasted it. They've never appreciated it. They've never actually wanted it to some degree because the country has always felt vulnerable. And finally, Iran is another one. Persia was the first superpower, absolutely the first superpower, huge, in 600 BC. And it lasted in its entity all the way until the 1900s, when Russia and Britain turned up and started digging for oil. British Petroleum started its genesis there. And then when in the First World War, we decided that we needed more oil, and we didn't want the Germans getting it. We actually got rid of the Shah there because he didn't want to be neutral, and we put our own guy in. We put the son in. He wasn't particularly good. He wasn't particularly democratic, and he spent a lot of money. He didn't look after the people, and that led to a revolution in 1979. And even before that, in 1952, the Prime Minister of Iran started making phone calls to Moscow and getting a little bit close to communism. So we orchestrated a coup, the CIA and MI6. All this stuff, and we got rid of him, and gave that power to the Shah, who, as we know, was then kicked out in 79. So I've shared a bit of detail. Forgive me if you know all this, but your average member of parliament doesn't. And that's dangerous, is the fact that we're now talking about an active war with Donald Trump, who I can assure you doesn't know anything about this, because I was there in America yesterday. I was back this morning, went onto the Hill, and at the State Department at Foggy Bottom, they've sacked 100 Middle East experts that actually work in that department that could provide that advice, that could give Donald Trump the knowledge to understand what's going on. So the challenges that we're facing today are a multitude. They're complex. There is now a new arms race taking place. There's a new push for nuclear weapons. There's the AI that Shafik has mentioned a number of times. I would add on AI that in the next 3 or 4 years, one side or another will win the race to harness quantum computing. Q-Day, as it's called. When that happens, whoever harnesses that capability will be able to break all cryptocurrencies. They'll be able to break all our nuclear codes in the UK. They'll be able to absolutely run havoc in our banking systems and so on. All the cyber attacks that we're receiving right now is so easy to do if they harness it first. And we need a Manhattan Project-style approach to linking everybody together to make sure we get there first. That will be game-changing, as I say. GPS will be out the window because they will just simply be able to encrypt it and then break it down. And that takes you to another space of competition, which is up in space itself. These things are all solvable because we have the size of the economy, we have the capabilities and so on. It's simply not coordinated. It's not collaborated, and there's no plan. And that takes you towards the end of the book of actually working together, building alliances, and showing the leadership that we now need to stand up to a very fast and changing world before it subsumes us. And that's where we stand at the moment. It is a grim place, there's no doubt about it. But there are like-minded middle nations that can actually then work together. It does require us to stay close to America and hope that they come back, but they may not. But for other nations and so forth to work together and recognize that actually, I'm afraid, China is working on an alternative model. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the equivalent of the EU and NATO put together. And they are rallying countries to join them. The Belt and Road operation now takes over 100 countries. And the Asian Investment Bank, those three operations there mimic that global order construct that I've said at the very, very beginning. We need this off-ramp. We need a way to coexist to avoid Armageddon. Because you can see the escalation in Iran, where nobody seems to be in control, as to how that could occur on a wider level. World War III won't be like World War II. It won't be big kinetic operations around the world. It will be a world of constant conflict, kinetic on a lower basis, bun fights between individual countries, or indeed proxies, but it'll also be very much in the grey zone as well, with the occasional tactical nuclear weapon potentially going off as well. This is, the world that we have to accept is coming around the corner. We need to wake up to it. And there can be answers, but it takes me back to the very, very beginning, only if we get a better quality of member of parliament to stand in, because it's the pool, the gene pool of parliamentarians for which we choose ministers and ultimately a prime minister as well. That's the challenge that we face, to upgrade our defense posture, but also upgrade our strategic thinking, our leadership. That's what Britain can do. We've done it in the past, and we can do it with many of the countries that are represented here as well. But it takes a recognition, sadly, as to where we are at the moment in that cycle of 85 seconds to midnight. I'm going to end on a more positive note, because I now can see the room is completely silent, and you've either decided not to listen to me any further, or I've really changed the tone of the evening. One person that we can smile about, who's brought us all here together, and I think deserves a toast. Please can you raise a glass to Shafik to say thank you, and his lovely wife, for bringing us all together. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.